And we are live. Hello, everyone. This is My Two Cents. This is a special topic-based stream. I haven't done one of these in a while, but a number of viewers and patrons have asked me to address the question, should ANCAPs support accelerationism? And is accelerationism a part of agorism? Essentially, the question is often asked, how, in principle, how do ANCAPs seek to achieve a stateless society? And accelerationism is, as it's been uh, postulated by some, would be, well, you really ought to want to bring the state to an end as soon as possible. Therefore, supporting particular progressive statist politicians that have really horrible economic policies that are going to collapse the economy and collapse the state is actually a good thing. For example, on my recent video about Andrew Yang and the UBI and his proposed UBI, a number of people in the comments said, this guy's a great accelerationist candidate. In other words, if we get him in office and he institutes a UBI, everyone eventually discovers it doesn't work. It collapses the economy, brings about the fall of the state, and potentially, when the state collapses, we go about instituting an ANCAP stateless society. On the other hand, some people would say, okay, but have you considered that that's the kind of thing that happened in the Weimar Republic prior to the rise of the Nazis and World War II Germany? They underwent a hyperinflation, their economy collapsed, their government collapsed as a result, and Adolf Hitler was the one who took power. So if the state collapses at a time when the population is largely fearful, scared, and still believes in the existence of a state, just collapsing the state might not help you achieve a stateless society. It might help a dictator to come to power, or it might be the conditions of which may be used as justification for instituting full-blown Marxism. Now, obviously, this is really there's a lot of elements that go into this type of discussion, and I don't pretend we can settle every one of those tonight. But I'm joined by Night Shift 10,000, Esoteric the Free, and Filthy Heretic. So to get this started, Eso, I know you've made probably more videos on the topic of agorism and how ANCAPs seek to achieve a stateless society than anyone else I know of. So I'm going to go ahead and give you the first word here. And what are your thoughts?
Well, I've got a lot to say, so that's probably a smart idea before I forget it all. But anyway, yeah, accelerationism, it's a good meme position. It's a good way to meme against the state. But yeah, first and foremost, accelerationism, it is conceptually it is compatible with libertarianism, but it's not a libertarian idea. Sort of as evidenced by the recent Church Christ shooting. That guy in his manifesto expressed an accelerationist idea, even though the society he wanted to move towards was, or at least expressly, the position which was expressed was moving towards ethnostatism. So it is it's a good premise, but along the way it can very easily get lost in translation, and the reason for this sort of comes with a problem that I've noticed with the way some libertarians talk about the state, that the state is sort of like a mindset people are stuck in. And I think that there's some truth to this. Definitely, if the media and everybody is telling you to be dependent on the state, and you have an economic policy in which the market and general interactions in the world are manipulated coercively by the state to be a certain way, yeah, that could be an argument that statism is a mentality. But as I sort of got into it, it's more created by a environment which exists as a result of coercion. For example, you don't have many independent arbiters, even though anybody easily could. Why? Well, it's not because necessarily they don't think that they and their neighbors are more trustworthy than the state. It's because legal arbitration is not possible in terms of competing with the state system. So people don't do it simply because it's risky and there's more risk associated with doing it. Now, a lot of people could get the impression that I am an accelerationist, and my position is of an accelerationist one, based on my general association recently of the coming market collapse with counter economics. But this is actually sort of a false conception, a false dichotomy which exists, because I'm not suggesting that agorism can only come as a result of a market collapse. It's just that we have innovations now, and we have an ability to easily trade around the state to where it's not as risky to do so, which a market collapse would greatly accelerate the demand for decentralized commodities and trade outside of the legal markets, because it would be more profitable to do so. And that's one of the main points that Konkin makes. Through agorism, anarchy is not achieved by ideology or by necessarily any desire for a stateless system. It's achieved by people who are in a society where it's become legally impossible to sustain their living, so they move outside of the white markets and start trading under the table, simply as a result of wanting to sustain food, put food on the table, and put a roof over their heads. And that's the main difference, essentially, is that with accelerationism, it doesn't take into consideration the structure of a state society. It doesn't necessarily understand why they work. The thing is, states collapse all the time. In fact, they collapse so often that, based on the model of government which is operating, you can put a general timeline around exactly when that state will collapse. In the case of republics, it's about 200 to 250 years. Um, but the point is that every time they do collapse, the problem is, for the accelerationist viewpoint, at least the libertarian accelerationist, is that the same thing has been observed to happen over and over again, which is just that another group will claim that they have dominion over the society's monopoly on arbitration, which allows a state to exist. And then moneylenders like the Rothschilds or any of these other international banking groups will simply pour money into the foundation which is most favorable to them, which seeks to head this monopoly on arbitration. That's what happens every single time. So, as a libertarian, you necessarily need counter economics, because if you have a society in a frame with a framework around a centralized court system where coercion is possible, then it most certainly is going to be used by the state, and or a group which is collecting a lot of resources together to essentially declare that it has political authority. And that's what the agorist position is you need, for one, to completely avoid political action, and to be completely self-reliant through counter-economic trade exchanges, or to simply avoid the legal markets as much as humanly possible. And this is because if you trade within a legal framework, you're simply giving a revenue for the state to sustain itself, instead of actually, engaging in arbitration outside of the state and creating your own security firms and setting up a decentralized framework which can exist when the state collapses, so that people won't fall back on centralized services, or so it's impossible for the Rothschilds to just create another monopoly on arbitration. And I think Konkin probably said this best when he made the point: the ends have to match the means. And a lot of people don't understand that. Like, they think that's philosophical woo when they hear quips like that. Like, they think, oh well, that doesn't mean anything. That's just fanciful language. But no, if you understand the actual economic circumstances around a society operating with a state, that makes perfect sense. You can only get a libertarian society with libertarian means. And if you use coercion, you're always going to get a coercive society. Why? Because coercion creates centralization, and a libertarian society can't exist in a society where there isn't any competition.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot to say there. Night Shift Filthy, you have anything to add?
No, I think he's covered just about everything I would have to say.
Okay.
Yeah, in all honesty, it does sound like a good idea at first until you do realize that, yeah, more than likely, trying to accelerate the collapse would more than likely create a power vacuum. And yeah, as long as people believe that the state is necessary, they're going to try to fill the hole with something else. And it really does break down into, it just needs to be a process over time that people need to see that the private sector can do everything that the public sector does, only better, cheaper, and more efficiently. And people need to accept that before really any major change is going to happen. So,
well, it's not even it's not even necessarily an ideological position. Look at China, look at Venezuela. These are societies where it's become impossible to sustain a living for the average person through legal means. So even though in both of those countries, things like cryptocurrency or freelance labor are completely outlawed, you see an abundance of it. It's essentially what keeps the local economies thriving.
Right.
Okay.
My thinking.
Go ahead.
My thinking is that although people can wish for the society, the economy, the government to collapse as much as they want, if you don't have a parallel infrastructure for people to go into, the counter economy, then it's only going to be a matter of time before people start to rally around and try to rebuild the state. I mean, as I was mentioned this in a previous video, where this almost happened in the United States during the Great Depression, where people were trading in a counter economy using gold instead of dollars. What ended up happening is because that the government could track who owned how much gold through the transactions in the banks, they were able to confiscate 70% of it. And
right, with FDR's executive order.
With that executive order, or as I prefer to call it, imperial fiat.
Oh, yeah, amen to that. Anyways,
I wasn't finished. Sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
So as a result, well, you have cryptocurrency already on the rise, which means that an executive order, or rather an imperial decree that attempts to confiscate all owned cryptocurrency or make it illegal is simply not going to work. It is going to be impossible. And as Essa was alluding to, people aren't going to exchange it for ideological reasons. They're going to do so because it's cheaper. You can either buy a gallon of milk for like 1/10 of a Litecoin, or you can buy it for $500,000.
All right, absolutely. Now, I would like to focus in on the so you mentioned the Rothschild banking model and how it plays into the state. But I think one thing that does need to be discussed is that any state in the existence of history to consolidate its power, and it's been done, the scenarios that have happened, played out like this, are different, but in principle, the same thing's going on. The people in power manufacture a crisis of some sort. It could be, I mean, the crises themselves can be different, but they manufacture a crisis, try to get the population scared, use the media that they've propped up or whatever, or control the means of how information is being spread, get everybody scared. Then you prop up some kind of Messiah type figure who comes in and shows everyone the solution. Okay, yeah, we're all dealing with this problem right now. It's really bad. It was caused by, the free market, or it was caused because people have too much freedom. And the necessary solution, of course, is just give up a little bit of your freedom and give your money to us, the state, and we will fix your problem for you. The population being scared and of the crisis doesn't really question this. They're willing to hand over their freedom and their money in exchange for the security the state offers. Of course, it doesn't fix the problem, and in fact, gets worse. They set up a new messiah figure who, again, blames it on too much freedom, too many free markets, and give us even more of your freedom, even more of your money, and we'll fix the problem. And the cycle just continues. The state constantly consolidating more power, consolidating more control. And I would see,
that's the problem with that, is that that's a bit of an incomplete argument, as I was alluding to. I mean, think about televangelists, for example. They were on mainstream television. They were everywhere back in the 80s and 90s, and they sold that exact message, and millions of people listened to them. They said, give us your money, stop doing drugs, stuff like that, and we can cure all diseases by praying. Diseases still existed. People still did drugs, and most of the population didn't give them their money. I mean, they made a lot because of the people who did, but and that's more or less what somebody like that would be in a stateless society. Well, it's everybody, benefits more from their competitors. They don't really see a reason, even though this guy is, telling them, hey, you need to give us some of your money. They say, well, this guy over here is selling a better product and it's a bit cheaper, so I think I'm going to go with him. That's how that would go down in a society without a state, where the counter economy has just become the economy, and most exchanges are decentralized and occur on a peer-to-peer basis.
Okay, definitely. The point I wanted to finish was when it comes that, and you're correct. Certainly, the state isn't the only entity capable of utilizing that fear-based coercion model. But when I was going to say is when a state actually collapses, take Weimar Germany pre-World War II, the Nazis then step in and show the people the solution, and the population, having just dealt with the economic collapse, dealt with the uncertainty and fearful, is more than willing to go along with this. So even though they've just traded one state for another, they're willing to go along with it because they see them as the solution. So I'd say, I mean, that's one of the best examples in my opinion, but other examples of where people just trade one state for another because they are successfully convinced that this new state is going to solve all their problems, even though the same problems inherent in all states are there, which is why I would say I think the flaw in accelerationism is the viewpoint that simply getting the state to collapse in and of itself is a good thing. That by itself is a positive step towards an ANCAP society. I don't think so, because because of all those historical examples, just collapsing the state in and of itself isn't going to make it more likely that an ANCAP society is going to result. The counter economics, as you pointed out, is a necessary part, and I would argue the more important part than just trying to get the state to collapse.
If counter economics is if actually forming a stateless society is fundamentally dependent on counter economics, where simply associating with the state is at best a misnomer and at worst is going to make the problem worse, then necessarily you have to reject any attempts to associate with the state. It's better to achieve a stateless society simply through libertarian means.
Mm-hmm. And it seems to me those that would call themselves accelerationists would say, okay, let's convince people to vote for, just as an example, like I said, those comments on my video, let's get people to vote for Andrew Yang, because once he's elected, his economic policies will drive us to ruin and it'll collapse the state. Well, if you're convincing people to vote for Andrew Yang, you're convincing them to vote to associate with the state. And unless if you just walk out and say, hey, everybody vote for Andrew Yang, I don't see how that in any meaningful way moves people towards libertarianism and or counter economics. Therefore, if you do achieve collapsing the state by getting him elected, you're still no closer to achieving an ANCAP society.
Now, there's one other issue I just realized that it's a very basic thing that I'm actually shocked nobody's pointed out yet, and that is one of the that accelerationists accept one fundamental premise of voting that even many statists don't recognize to be true. The premise is that politicians in a campaign are telling the truth about what they'll actually do in office.
I was actually just about to mention that's assuming that Andrew Yang's even telling the truth about his policies.
It's hard to say what he is and is not going to do because I don't have a crystal ball into his heart and mind as much as I'd like to. But yeah,
Okay.
I mean, there's a very, very, very solid chance that all that's really being done and accomplished is you've convinced a large portion of the population to voluntarily associate and put their time, effort, and money behind just another lying sociopath. Great job.
Yeah, exactly.
Assuming that Andrew Yang even was telling the truth, it seems more than likely he probably would go forward with the consumption tax, not because he actually wants to, but because we're seeing a growth in various different industries which didn't exist 5 years ago. So he'll probably do that simply like whoever the next president is will probably end up doing that or something which has virtually the exact same effect as a consumption tax, because simply the state is at this point requiring more revenue to collect revenue from the markets.
Okay, just quickly, I see Alex Denton just sent a super chat. Thank you very much. He says, Rothbard made a good argument for pro-choice in terms of abortion. I was curious on your take against his. Thank you for the comment. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to say I'm sorry, but that is not the topic of this stream. I've already made my series on abortion and libertarianism. I believe I've laid out everything I have to say there. If you think there's an important point that I've missed somewhere in there, you're welcome to message me. Either leave a comment or through any of my, or if you want, use the Phone Me app. That's something I've recently started using. But thank you for the comment, but that is not the topic of this stream. So, anyways, before that, I see the chat's already turned to that because of his comment. People are starting to debate that, but as I said, that's not the topic of the stream. So, sorry. So where'd you leave off?
Oh, I was done.
Okay. All right. I guess on that note, anyone else have anything in the comment section? If anyone has any questions about anything we've said so far, now's the time to put them up.
Yeah, it was a relatively short discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mostly because we don't have any actual accelerationists here.
Okay.
I mean, I don't really talk to you that much, Sense or Night Shift, so I just assumed that Night Shift is going to be an accelerationist. I don't know if he was, and we persuaded him off of it, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, honestly, if we did have I would be happy to have an accelerationist here. I didn't know if, I guess I'm not close with any. I'm not acquainted with any other content creators that are adhere to that position. It was more a subject I wanted to address just because of the number of people who have requested that I talk about the issue. The people who requested it not necessarily being accelerationists themselves, but just wanting to know what my thoughts were.
I mean, like I said, the whole neat bucks thing, that's a pretty good meme, especially considering that a bunch of Andrew Yang fans tried to flood 4chan with it. it backfired, and now it's now it's about accelerationism. I love it.
Okay, Chris Inman asks, do you think the Convention of the States is accelerationism? Now, by Convention of the States, I'm assuming you're referring to the constitutional provision for the states to come together and propose amendments to the Constitution. There are a number of mainstream conservative commentators who have been advocating for that. Dennis Prager being one of them, I believe. Ben Shapiro, I think, as well. And I don't remember if Steven Crowder ever talked about that. I guess could you expand on that? Why would you think that a convention of states would be accelerationism? And I know there's a delay between me speaking and when they actually hear. So if any of you have thoughts on why that would be, feel free.
I was trying to think about that. I was trying to think about that myself, but
I have some
because it's probably because he's coming at this with the argument that a system which is completely federal is less efficient because you have one simple distributor of economic policy dictating pretty much everything. So yeah, the problem with that would be evident pretty quickly. You have that would be like somebody in Washington D.C. deciding the local economic policies for a small town in Oregon. If I'm understanding that correctly.
Okay, he says because the federal government will not comply with the states. Okay, so your argument being that if any amendments were proposed by a convention of states that were actually attempted to limit the power of the federal government would fight back. It would create.
Oh no, I had a completely different understanding of that.
Okay, not U.S. So that's what the Chris Inman, the guy who commented, that was what he just commented.
No, those aren't proposed with the intention to be accelerationist. No, what those are proposed to try and preserve the state.
Yeah, I was just gonna say,
even as their premise, the argument of a small government, quote unquote, conservative, would be to have these small, limited tax bills in order to stop the collapse of the government.
I have some insight into this only because this originated from radio talk show host Mark Levin, and he wrote a book, I believe he called The Liberty Amendments, where he identified this and even gave some suggestions himself, some of which are absolutely insane. For example, he unintentionally codifies federal regulations, or federal restrictions, I should say, into law, in that he unintentionally implies that the federal government is now authorized to use its regulatory agencies, its alphabet soup agencies, to restrict the economy. That's not what the actual amendment says, but the actual amendment, if I recall correctly, is something about the amount, or the dollar amount, in terms of costs that any one economic restriction can inflict. But it does unintentionally authorize their existence. But as Eso said, yeah, the point of the thing is to actually postpone the collapse of the state. If anything, it's anti-accelerationist. Now, the only way it could be accelerationist is if one of the criticisms of the Liberty Amendments from a statist perspective is that the Convention of the States would be hijacked by progressives, and they would codify all sorts of their proposals, like universal health care.
Oh, and definitely that would be something progressives would want. Let's add an amendment to the Constitution that guarantees healthcare as a right. Healthcare as a right. So
oh yeah, and that's something that a lot of statists who are opposed to the amendments from a conservative perspective tend to be concerned about, for reasons that are completely understandable. But we have to assume that when we're talking about the Convention of the States that they want to put hard restrictions on or hard constitutional restrictions on the size and power of the United States government. Of course, the fundamental problem with this, and I know I'm going a little bit off topic here, but I think I want to address it nonetheless, is that if the government is already not complying with the Constitution, what makes you think just making the Constitution a little bit bigger is going to change anything? You dumbass.
Well, you know, whether that's explicitly the point of the stream, I think it is worth talking about. And but the standard view of the minarchist libertarian or the small government conservative is that government is inherently a good thing, so long as there are limits placed on it by a document like the Constitution. The government has, and they would say the government has overstepped the bounds of the Constitution. It's what we need to do is get back to the vision of the founding fathers and rein in the power of the state. And this is a viewpoint I held myself for many years. But one thing that I find a lot of people who take this perspective haven't even thought about is, okay, go back to George Washington's presidency. How long did it take after the Constitution was written before the government started overstepping the bounds of the Constitution, and we got the Whiskey Rebellion and the Sedition Act, and how those things went down? But pretty much at no point in this nation's history has the government not overstepped its constitutional authority, because, of course, the state acts in its own self-interest, which means increasing its in size and increasing in power. So that no effort to keep a government small can even in principle succeed.
Well, actually, if you look at it, adding healthcare for all to the Constitution might actually be accelerationist in and of itself.
Oh, it definitely would be.
Look what happened to Finland. They actually did do a Universal Healthcare Act just recently, and their government has utterly collapsed.
No, it hasn't. Sorry to interrupt, but that's a bit of a misnomer. I've been seeing that article going around myself, and a lot of anarchists are saying, like, yeah, this is great, their government has collapsed. But government collapse means a completely different thing in Europe, because the way it works is that their parliamentary system with like a dozen alphabet soup agency of their political parties. Basically, the way it works is that the political parties have to form coalitions with each other, make deals, make agreements. And once you have political parties like that are able to form a majority in parliaments enough to be able to get legislation passed, they call that a government. I don't know why they do, but that's what they do. So when they talk about government collapse, what they actually mean is that the deal that Party A formed with Party L is off. And now no political block or no block of political parties is able to get legislation passed. That's what collapse means.
So in other words,
wow,
yeah,
really
just deliberate obfuscation and attempting to make language more confusing so that people have a less clear understanding of what's actually happening in politics.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, that would be like what happened in Spain or Belgium. The government was effectively like a lame duck government that, because under the circumstances they couldn't legally do anything. But it's not that there wasn't a government.
Pretty much. So
That
yeah,
is really-
Finland still has a coercive monopoly. Yay!
Oh man,
I know it's disappointing, but sadly that's the case.
All right. Now, one thing that should be brought up, like I said, I'm going to preface this with I do not know in detail what Larkin Rose's view would be on accelerationism. I did hear in the last debate I listened to him on. I think it was 2018. Larkin Rose did a debate with Lauren Southern at a convention they were both at. The topic of the debate was, should libertarians support open borders or closed borders? Larkin Rose took the position libertarians should support open borders. Lauren Southern took the position they should support closed borders. Now, I thought Larkin did a really good job of in his opening statement explaining why, in principle, closed borders are not libertarian. Lauren Southern shot back with essentially, yes, I agree with you in principle, but we have to think practically here. So long as there's a state, if you've got open borders and a welfare state, and people who can vote, it's floods of immigrants are going to vote for a bigger welfare state, a bigger government, and Larkin's response, which was kind of just an off the cuff remark, when they were going back and forth, and Lauren said, well, I mean, think about it. If all these immigrants are flooding in and voting and expanding the welfare state, that's going to collapse the economy. Larkin's response was something to the effect of, well, yeah, I want that to happen. And I want the state to collapse, which doesn't give me, like I said, I can't I don't want to attribute anything to Larkin Rose that he hasn't said. I just know that remark in and of itself struck me as a accelerationist type remark. And well, I would agree that in principle, libertarians should obviously not be supporting closed borders. I would agree that a statist society where anyone can vote, where you've got a welfare state and you've got open borders in that situation isn't necessarily a libertarian position, because the statists themselves have their own reasons for wanting open borders. I guess if anyone had any comments to make on that or not, but that was the only example I can think of a libertarian saying something that at least at face value sounded like accelerationism.
Well, I mean, as Esso said, it's a fantastic meme. You hear people on TV saying like, "Oh, this is a great," especially on news. I hear Tucker Carlson saying it all the time. Anything that's bad to him is a threat to our democracy. And I'm sitting thinking, good. Democracy sucks. I mean, that's obviously not to say that any other form of government is better. They're all horrible. But
I honestly don't understand why people seek Tucker as a right-wing political leader. He's, having listened to a number of his commentaries lately, he's anything but right-wing. I mean, granted, he's more he's to the right of mainstream progressives, but he's supports all kinds of economic restrictions, and
the guys.
It's why the left-right dichotomy is freaking useless.
Exactly.
I mean, here's the question. Adolf Hitler, George W. Bush, and Ron Paul. 3 politicians with wildly disparate beliefs and ideas, and yet all 3 are considered to be right-wing. They can barely agree on anything, and for some reason they're lumped into a single category where they're all supposed to think and act exactly alike. The left-right political dichotomy doesn't tell us anything and limits our understanding of very complex issues into false binaries, where the issue is always between the Republican position or the Democrat position, even though they're both wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I mean, I wanted to talk about the issue with Larkin Rose and Lauren Southern debate in the sense that I think both the open border and closed border positions are incorrect. I think it's not a question of whether or not borders should be open or closed. It should be a question of, should the government be involved in borders in the first place?
Well, exactly. And I know in my video I said open borders, market borders, and border security. In a libertarian society, you don't necessarily have open borders. You have private borders, and the owners of private property are free to set up their own restrictions as to who they want and not want, who they do and do not want on their own private property. The open borders, closed border only becomes an issue when it's the state, a third party, deciding unilaterally who gets to cross over or leave an imaginary line drawn on the ground.
Yeah, if you have open borders, it's still going to be a problem because, like, let's just pretend the welfare state isn't there. You still have government control of roads, government control of infrastructure, and that is going to create a form of forced association where people who are entering this country, who other people might not otherwise want into this country, are allowed to be there. So it's just it's the same problem as closed borders, but in reverse.
Mm-hmm.
Nightship, you wanted to say something?
No, that pretty much sums it up, honestly.
Well, I mean, that's the reason why the state cares so much about borders, pretty much exclusively. Is it about society being more safe? No, it's pretty much just about revenue.
Yep.
All right, I'm taking a look in the comments here.
The more people that you have in a given society, the harder it is to maintain control over the markets like the state does through these various different conglomerates of industry.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've been streaming for about 40 minutes here. I think there's quite a bit to be said. Well, we've more or less summarized where we all stand on this. I know, like I said, I definitely can't settle any one issue in a given stream, but I think we've addressed the issue of why accelerationism in and of itself is not libertarian. Simply collapsing the state is not going to bring about an ANCAP society. Was there anything else anybody wanted to touch on while we're here, or should that be where we
I
cut
don't
it
know.
off?
Should we talk about the abortion issue that the super chat originally asked about?
All right. Well, we do have time, so I'd be open to doing that.
All right. Yeah, I mean, what did Rothbard say about that?
I'm not personally familiar with his argument. I know Rothbard Rothbard's position on abortion, I'm not sure. I believe Rothbard had his position is considered controversial with regards to parental responsibility with children. He saw the relationship between parent-child as one parents can voluntarily choose to break. If parents caring for their children is a type of contractual relationship where the parents are the trusted owners of the child, parents can at any point refuse to keep caring for their children. And I think Rothbard argued, if I'm not mistaken, that parents could abandon their children. They don't have an obligation they might not be able to kill their children directly, but they don't have an obligation to care for them. So abortion then, and like I said, I've never actually read any quotes from him on abortion itself, only on the issue of childcare. But abortion would then be not a direct killing, but a refusal to use one's body to care for their unborn child. I guess if you're still in the chat, like I said, I'm not terribly familiar with Rothbard's position. I'm pretty sure that's what it was, though. If I am in error on any point there, feel free to say so.
I know that in Against Intellectual Property, the author Stefan Kinsella touches on abortion. He happens to be pro-choice, unfortunately. And
Okay.
his argument is that if individuals are to have self-ownership, then that means that it is definitely within the woman's right as a moral agent to be able to terminate a pregnancy at any point.
All right. I see Lysander Spooner in the chat says Rothbard believed that fetuses were infringing on the property rights of the woman by residing in the womb, and thus she would be allowed to kill them. This is something I think I addressed in my 4th video of the abortion series. Like I said, when it comes to the issue of abortion, there are essentially 3 ways you can argue in favor of abortion. Point number 1 would be to argue that unborn children are not living human beings. Point number 2 would be or argument number 2 would be, well, they are living human beings. There is some kind of fundamental difference in their nature that takes place at birth. Basically, an unborn child is a fundamentally different type of being than a born child. So there's something grounded in nature such that the one has a right to life and the other doesn't. Or to argue, as it sounds like Rothbard's argument would be, the unborn child is living human being. It does have the same rights as any other human being, but it is in some sense aggressing against the rights of its mother, and abortion would then be an act of self-defense.
Here's the thing. I wanted to touch on that. That was that third one was the only one that I thought might be admissible, because it seems like the birthing process could be considered a violation of the NAP by some regards, but even that one is kind of even that one was kind of a hard point. So I don't know. I mean, I just wanted to bring that up.
Okay. To summarize my view on why that argument fails, in my opinion, is first, it cannot be the case that the fetus is at the very least, the fetus will be equivalent to someone who is chained up and thrown onto another person's property against their will. The fetus cannot be responsible for its being in the mother's body. In that, barring cases of rape, if a man and a woman voluntarily choose to engage in sex, that comes with it the implicit risk that a living human being could result, who then is in an imperiled situation where it has no choice but to depend on its mother's body for the next 9 months in order to survive. I use the analogy. An analogy I've used once is, suppose, for example, a person is kidnapped, tied up, and thrown into against their will onto a private plane that is owned by someone else. The plane takes off, and in the course of the flight, the owner of the plane opens up a compartment and finds this person, trapped in his plane. He's there. He did not deliberately trespass. He's there against his will. Well, if the person then says, "Look, you're trespassing on my property. I'm sorry, you got to leave," and throws him out the window of the plane, I think immediately everyone's like, "What? That he's killing the person." Well, imagine then that the owner of the plane then says, "Look, the person was trespassing on my property, and it's not my fault. He couldn't fly." I don't think that meshes. It's not common sense, but again, he's not in that case. He's not merely removing him from his property. He's throwing him out the window of the plane. He's actively ensuring that the person will die. Much in the same way, abortion is not merely choosing to withhold support or choosing not. It's not like I'm walking along the street and I see a person dying and I don't do anything to help him. That's different from me turning and then chopping off the person's head. Obviously, letting a person die and actively killing them are two different things. Abortion being actively killing a person. Further, I don't think like I said, at best, and the only person who could try to make that argument would be a person who is a woman who is pregnant as the result of rape. And by even the most radically pro-choice groups admit that comprises less than 1% of all pregnancies.
Even in the case of rape, I mean, it's not the child's fault.
Exactly. It's not the child's fault any more than it's the fault of the person who's been put on the other person's plane.
I was thinking about using a similar analogy, except I was going to say kidnapping. Imagine you capture some, I don't know, teenage girl, lock her in a cage in your basement, and then the next day you point a gun at her, just like, you're trespassing on my property.
Yes. And saying, I know some have said, well, did the woman consent to getting pregnant? As I pointed out in my 4th video in that series, saying I consent to sex, but I don't consent to getting pregnant is kind of like saying I only consent to buying a lottery ticket if it's the winning ticket, or I consent to texting and driving, but I don't consent to traffic accidents. If you consent, if a consequence is a direct result of an action you took, then you are still responsible for the consequence. I know the issue of tacit consent comes up a lot in libertarian philosophy, but the tacit consent is obviously illicit. If you cannot tacitly consent to something someone else does to you, but if something happens as a direct result of an action you took, I think it is appropriate to say, because you are responsible for the action, you are responsible for the consequences.
Right.
I mean, I like to buy a lottery ticket only if I consent to having the winning lottery ticket.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be nice.
It makes no sense. Pregnancy is the natural result of sex. Therefore, I don't see how a person can meaningfully say I consent to sex, but I don't consent to pregnancy.
Actually, can I lay down a scenario? On that really quick?
Sure.
I don't know if I did this before, but okay. So let's put that same exact situation. A person has been kidnapped, they've been tied up, and they've been thrown on somebody's private plane. However, they have also been strapped to that person is a bomb. There's basically a bomb strapped onto that person, but it has a 0.7% chance of going off. And the pilot of the plane basically finds that they have a bomb on them, but the person that's been tied up with the bomb on them basically says it only has a 0.7% chance of blowing up. Do you still have a right to kind of defend yourself in that way by throwing them off the plane? or should you accept the risk of that bomb not going off? I mean, what would that be?
You can't just remove the bomb.
Well, okay, so yeah, the bomb is basically kind of nailed to them, sort of. It's like nailed into their skin, sort of.
So the guy's not already dead.
No, you can
Okay.
you can survive like having like nails and screws like drilled into your body without dying.
Okay. No, I think this this scenario I think is meant to represent people bring up the fact. Well, isn't it the case that women sometimes die in childbirth? Therefore,
that's it.
If there's a chance that the woman could die as a result of the pregnancy, could abortion be an act of self-defense, much like throwing the person with the bomb off is an act of self-defense? Now, I would like to point out now something that needs to be said. No two situations are perfectly analogous. And in other words, every analogy at some point breaks down, but some analogies are better than others. Now, I think in this case, I don't think the situations are quite analogous, because obviously in that case, the bomb obviously is the intention of the bomb is to harm people on the person it's strapped to and the people on the plane. Pregnancy, well, there may be risks with pregnancy. It is not the intention of the unborn child, or even, I would say, it is not the natural state of affairs that a pregnancy would result in the woman dying. So I think that is a meaningful distinction there. However, again, dealing with the probability there, it's also not the case that when a woman's pregnant, it's like this. Like the bomb might go off. There's a 7% chance it might go off. We don't know when it's going to go off or if it's going to go off. If it happens, it'll happen randomly and suddenly and kill everyone. In the case of the woman who's pregnant, okay, is there can we nail it down to a percentage how likely it is that the woman's going to die as a result of pregnancy? Maybe, and it is a very, very low chance. But by the same token, if and when the pregnancy may be a threat to the mother, it's going to be much easier to detect that beforehand, and before it gets, or if it say it's an ectopic pregnancy, the fetus has implanted itself outside the womb, and the doctors have determined this is an ectopic pregnancy. It is impossible to remove the child without killing it. And if you let the pregnancy continue, the woman's uterus is gonna rupture, and in all likelihood, she'll bleed to death. Well, in that case, yes, I would say abortion is justified, because we have a situation where if nothing is done, two people are going to die. In that case, better to save one life than to lose two. But also notice in that case, through medical science, we know at the point the doctors are able to determine, yes, this is going to happen, and we have time to fix it. In the case of the bomb, if all you have is there's a 7% chance it's going to go off, we don't know when it's going to go off, and the moment it goes off, everybody's going to die. It's just not. I guess though it is, I would say, a moral dilemma. If it's that low of a chance the bomb goes off, do you throw the person off? But I still think there are too many meaningful differences between the scenarios for it to be analogous to abortion.
All right. And no, let me say that me personally, if I was put in that situation where it was just me and this person with the bomb that's been basically screwed into them, I would go ahead and chance it, because in that case, you have a 99.3% chance of living. And I was basically trying to narrow that scenario down to like the amount of women that actually do die in childbirth, because it's extremely small. But I mean, that was kind of my point, is like, even with that, is there a justification for that or no? But yeah, personally, no, I would risk it. It's just I can't make that decision for someone else.
Okay, yeah, and again, like I said, I think the two situations just aren't analogous. It's a weak analogy.
Right.
To use another one that might drive this home more, imagine you're walking down a crowded street. Now, I imagine using crime statistics, we could calculate the percentage likelihood that any given person on that street might pull out a knife and attempt to stab you to death. We could calculate that say it, and it's probably something really small, like 0.0001%, that any given person on the street might pull out a knife and stab you to death. But if you just pulled out a gun and shot a random person in the head and then justified it, look, there was a 0.0001 chance that based on the crime rates reported in this city, there is a statistical chance that that person might have pulled out a knife and killed me. Therefore, I acted in self-defense to ensure that that didn't happen. I mean, how absurd. I think that's kind of the situation we're in the case of abortion. Is there a small percentage chance that a woman could die in childbirth? Yes, but if that's likely to happen, it can be determined before. Doctors can determine that beforehand. There are other treatment options available such that, and in modern medical science, with modern medical science, the percentage of cases where basically the mother will certainly die and you can't save the child also are much lower than they used to be. Like I said, the only case I know of is an ectopic pregnancy, but it's just actively killing someone through poisoning or dismemberment, which is what abortion is not analogous to a situation like with the bomb or with the utilitarian train experiment or any of the other analogies people try to draw.
All right.
I guess, Eso, did you have anything to say? No, I was just going to say that Ghost is streaming right now, so...
Yeah.
Nice.
And a coworker called in sick today, so I gotta go.
Okay, no problem.
All right.
Anyways, that was kind of an off the topic, but thank you again. I'm sorry, I've already forgotten your name, but I'll check it again. Thank you so much for the super chat. Just to let everyone know, I have made a series called Abortion and Libertarianism, which is available on my channel if you'd like to check those out. And I guess hopefully we'll do another one of these next time. There's a particular, if anyone has any particular topics they'd like to hear streams on, hopefully we can get Eso and Filthy to come back, I'm sure. And you guys go ahead and give yourselves a shout out.
Oh, hi, I'm the Heretic. I do videos on my own channel, Filthy Heretic. Go check it out. It makes some pretty epic stuff.
I'm Esoteric the Free. I'm currently on hiatus from making my general rants and commentaries, but I'll occasionally stream and upload, news topics as of right now.
Okay. And just to let everyone know, they recently did a video collaboration with Postal Cat about the New Zealand shooting that I thought was excellent. Please go check that out. Actually, I would invite Postal Cat to these streams as well, but to my knowledge, he is not interested in streaming. Okay, and Night Shift?
Night Shift 10,000. I also make content. It is awesome. Please subscribe to me. And I'm gonna be posting a lot more right now since things aren't really happening in my life and things are going well. So
okay, awesome. Yeah. And he and I will have another collab coming soon. We haven't quite decided on what it'll be yet, but there will be another coming.
Yes.
All right. So thanks for everybody stopping by, and as always, that is my 2 cents. So take it for what it's worth.